Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the keynote address of the 30th Annual Russell B. Clark Gerontology Conference. I'm Jeremy Jorgensen, Director of the BYU Gerontology Program, and I am joined by Dr. Karen Fingerman, Professor of Human Development and Family Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm going to start this morning by talking a little bit about the person that this conference is named after. This is Dr. Russell B. Clark. He received his medical doctorate in 1929, was first married to Ruby Dorius in 1929, and then to Donna Keeney in 1951. He has 5 children. He passed away on September 10th, 2009, as Utah's oldest resident. Dr. Clark served in church and community positions throughout his life and was noted for his remarkable vitality. He regularly competed in the Huntsman World Senior Games in St. George, Utah, and still holds records for the men's 50-meter and 200-meter dash in his age category, which was 100 to 104 years old at that time. His desire to compete and his zest for life remain an example to all of us. Dr. Clark enriched the lives of thousands of people during his many years of medical practice in Chicago and California. After 19 years of general practice in Chicago, Dr. Clark moved to California in 1948 and purchased and managed a private hospital in Artesia and then another in Glendora. At 102, he still maintained a business and was honored as America's oldest worker by the U.S. Department of Labor in October of 2003. His support of the BYU Gerontology program over the years reflected his long-term interest in promoting education and research on aging issues and enhancing the well-being of older adults. Many thanks to the Russell B. Clark family for their support of our gerontology program and this conference throughout the years. This morning, I was doing a little searching on the internet for Dr. Clark, and I found a lot of very interesting information about him. And so if you want to learn more, we do have some information at our website under the conference tab about him, a biography, but he's had a lot of interesting experiences in life, and we absolutely appreciate his support. I'd like to give a little bit of an update on our program as well here. We currently have around 250 gerontology minor students and 70 faculty affiliates that are spread across several departments and colleges across the university, almost everyone. We're still trying to reach out to everybody, but it's been really exciting to see the program grow and have so many people involved. Welcome those of you that are here today in those groups. During this past year, because of generous donations, we were able to give 40 different awards, including scholarships, service awards, a research award, and some graduate student fellowships. We love our students and are so grateful that we can support you as you learn about aging. We do have a gerontology club, the Gerontology Student Association, who mainly participates in service opportunities, and recently they've done recording, or they've been interviewing older adults using Zoom and providing a life history to those that they interviewed, something that they could do at a distance. The normal service activities they used to do were not available during COVID. We've all had to adjust just a little bit. And then I wanted to give one alumni spotlight. Lindsay Elmont says, after graduating from BYU, I went on to graduate school at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm getting my master's in speech language pathology. Along with my classes, I have been providing therapy in the Marquette Speech and Hearing Clinic with 2 geriatric clients with aphasia caused by stroke. Last semester, I also led an adult therapy group that met once a week to work on social communication after suffering from strokes or traumatic brain injury. After graduation, I plan to work, as a speech language pathologist in a hospital or other medical setting. We appreciate hearing from Lindsay and all of other alumni, and so excited that we can launch students into their careers in graduate school and with some knowledge about aging and adult development. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to go to our website, and especially for students, check out the different opportunities that are available to you. So there's our update, and without further ado, I will turn the time over to Alex Jensen, a professor in the School of Family Life and a faculty affiliate of our program, who will introduce our keynote speaker today.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's a real honor and privilege for me to introduce Dr. Fingerman. Dr. Karen Fingerman is a professor of human development and family sciences at UT Austin. She studies adult development and aging and is the founding director of the Texas Aging and Longevity Center. She also oversees the graduate portfolio in aging and health at UT Austin. And her research has asked how relationships with family members, friends, and acquaintances change from young adulthood to older age, with particular attention to emotional qualities of ties and support exchanges. She's published over 150 scholarly articles and chapters on families and friends in later life. And very impressively, her research has drawn on experience sampling, daily diary, electronically activated recorders, survey methods, observational techniques, experimental paradigms, and salivary hormone data. That's a lot of different methods for one individual. As of this month, her research has been cited well over 7,000 times. In addition to being funded by the National Institute of Aging for nearly 20 years, she's also been supported by the Brookdale Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. Dr. Fingerman directed a study called the Family Exchanges Study, which was a longitudinal study that involved middle-aged adults, their romantic partners, their grown children, and their aging parents. So just pause on that for a second. You've got 3 generations, multiple family members in each generation, and it was longitudinal. Absolutely incredible. She's currently conducting a study for the National Institute of Aging, or funded by the National Institute of Aging, called the Daily Experiences and Wellbeing in Later Life Study, that's looking at over 300 older adults' social relationships and their physical and cognitive functioning in a daily context, again, using a variety of ecologically valid assessments. Personally, I had the privilege of meeting Karen when I was a first year's master's student at Purdue, and she gave me the chance to work in her lab. And working with Karen taught me a lot of things. Luckily, she was willing to then serve on both my master's and my dissertation committee. And we published multiple times since then together. And all those times in working with Karen, the thing that I've learned about her, she is a true scholar. Amongst scholars, she is a real scholar. When you look at all those different methods she's used, all those metrics, even those they really speak for themselves. She is a true scholar. She's incredibly rigorous, and she always answers the hard questions. She doesn't shy away from things that are challenging. And with that, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Karen Fingerman.
Thank you so much for that very, very generous introduction. I should add, I was just before the talk, I was saying that I get these little email alerts when people cite or read my work, and it's usually the papers that Alex Jensen wrote. So he's done some really, really great work with me, and I'm very, very grateful to have that opportunity. And I also want to thank you very much for having me speak. I've spoke last night, and I've spoken to many audiences, and I have to tell you, you are amongst the most generous and engaging and just delightful audiences. So I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to share some more with you about the Family Exchanges Study and what I know about different generations. And I'm going to talk primarily about that middle generation. Ties between generations are among the strongest relationships historically and cross-culturally and within the US today. They've been growing in prominence. For many individuals, they are their closest tie. When you say, who are you closest to? Marriage is not, has been on the decline in the US for a variety of reasons, and people feel closest to their parents or their grown children. It's an incredibly important and resource-rich relationship. And I'll talk a lot about that in a moment. But what I want to talk about is what is the basis for this parent-child involvement in modern societies. If you look historically, it was economics. So you want to get the farm, you better stay around. That's where you're going to get your livelihood. If your parent is the blacksmith in the town, well, that's where you're going to get your livelihood. So it was very economic. But the fact that many of you right now are students at a university means that you are thinking of different ways. Perhaps you're going to go and work in your parents' business, but more of you are going to be looking for other economic opportunities, and it's very much the structure of our economy. Now, there are also social and legal sanctions. So there are cultures in which there are laws. China has a new law that went on the books about 3-4 years ago. France has one, and some states in the US have laws that you must support your parents, but they are rarely enforced and cannot be enforced. Now, social sanctions, interestingly, that's if I showed up when my kids were a little younger and I showed up for a department event, and it was for families, and I didn't have my kids with me, people would say, hey, where's John and the kids? And I'd say, oh, they have a soccer game or whatever was going on. Nobody actually has ever asked me at work, hey, did you call your mom? When are you going to visit her? So really, it's not that society, now there are ways in which, yes, we are expected to, and we may expect of ourselves, but it's not as public. It is primarily emotional and voluntary, and that's a very different kind of bond. And when I say voluntary, I mean it is not legal or social. We may feel internally a very strong sense of obligation, and that may be rooted in our religious beliefs, in our cultural beliefs, but nevertheless, if you're a parent and you don't take care of your children, the state will intervene. They will come in, they will take those children away, they will do something about it. But that is not the case if you are not involved with your parents, or if they are not involved with you and you are over the age of 18. Children, in terms of that love and feelings of affection, children establish enduring attachments to their parents. And if you take a child development or a lifespan course, you're going to learn about attachment. It arises in the first year of life. It's very innate, and babies become very attached to their parents or caregivers. What's interesting and has received less attention is that parents remain invested in grown children. That is a reciprocal feeling of attachment, and it appears to be part of primate behavior. So Jane Goodall did these wonderful observations of chimpanzees, and she wrote about them in great detail, and she gave names to them. And Flo was the matriarch of the, society, if you will, of her little clan of chimps. And there was a point when she was quite elderly, and her son Fabian was a full-grown alpha male. And another alpha male came and attacked Fabian. And Flo, this frail elderly chimp, jumped in and started attacking the alpha male, huge chimp who was attacking her son, because you never outgrow that desire to protect your child, whether they're older and stronger or not. There's something that researchers have called, therefore, the generational stake in humans. And the idea there is this little, on the web, kind of a meme, if you will, or a saying, your child's dreams are your dreams. So the generational stake is the idea that parents look at the children as their future. That is not reciprocated. The parent cannot be the child's future, and yet there's a flow that goes in that direction, and it's part of the reward of being a parent. It shows up across a variety of different ways that we'll go over today. Now, when you think about this, what it means is that middle generation has this strong investment in a child, but may also have living parents, and that is extremely common. What happens by midlife, this is sort of a more young adulthood, but as they both grow older, that child as an adult will still have strong bonds. There will still be that feeling that Flo, the matriarch, had. And therefore, as parents' needs increase, we talk sometimes about a sandwich generation, but that does not capture the complexity of what's going on. I've also heard about the two faces, that you have to look at your grown child and look at your parent at the same time if you're in your 40s or 50s and trying to help them both. But I would like to suggest that it's more of a pendulum, that there are times when the grown children get the majority of attention and times when the parents do, and that may oscillate across days. It may be that as parents grow ill, there's a greater swing this way, or as grown children incur needs, there's a greater swing that way. And I'm going to take a look at that with you today. I want to talk about this in terms of two ways of thinking about it. One is these relationship factors, and that includes that love and investment, which is going to be greater for the child from the parent. there are going to be beliefs about family, and that's what I was talking about, obligation and rewards of seeing your child thrive, or rewards of feeling like your behavior matches your values and you believe you should help your parents. There are also changing factors. That parent may be incurring greater needs. So at some points, that parent's going to be giving more to the grown child well into late life, like Flo and Fabian. But at some point, the needs may change and it will go the other way. There's also this idea of life status. So if you are currently a student, chances are that your parents are even more invested in you than they would be if you weren't a student. So there are things about that as you go through life that shift. Perhaps when you have children, your parents are more involved, or perhaps they're less involved because you're busy with your children. So in young adulthood, that flow is likely to go from parent to grown child. We've seen this increasing throughout the 21st century. And I think it's in large part because the world is getting more and more complex for young adults. It used to be you graduated from college, you would get a job. Now you need to be thinking in a more tailored way, what major should I have? How should I set myself up to get that job? And parents are a good source of advice. Young adulthood is also lasting longer for many young adults. So, and again, not in a bad way. I think this is the fact that we have a society where you're going to live into your 80s. So you are exploring more, you are making more peer relationships. And so that's part of what's going on in young adulthood that requires parental investment. In midlife, I've already mentioned, we're seeing also in midlife, people are thriving more, they're working longer, they're more involved in a variety of ways. I have them all very happy here, but there can be a great deal of stress as well. And then in late life, often people are remaining healthy, remaining engaged. But of course, the thing that concerns us, and that one of the talks covered last night, is this idea that there is at some point often a need for caregiving. And that's the midlife. That usually is the spouse. They'll take care of each other, but at some point, one of them is typically widowed, and that becomes the grown child. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about relationship qualities. That's that love and affection. Support exchanges, which may be based in beliefs or may be based in that affection. You want to help each other. I will try to talk some about conflict and conflict behaviors, because in any relationship that involves this kind of intensity, chances are things are also going to be stressful and tense at times. And if we have time, I'd like to talk about daily life. Dr. Jorgensen is one of the leading authorities in doing this kind of research with couples. Oh, I should mention, I didn't when we were talking about young adults. You also have Dr. Coyne, who's very, very renowned in research on young adults. So you have a lot of expertise in your department, and I'll try to complement some of that today in my talk. I'm going to start by telling you about a study that we did with different age groups really across the lifespan. And so we interviewed teenagers, young adults, midlife adults, and young, what we call young old, because old age is really a very long time. And so we've divided this into two groups, and we'll divide that into two groups. So we're really talking about maybe every 20 years. What we did is we gave them this measure that is used all over the world. It's a standard measure, and it's a great way to map close ties. So we say that's you in the middle. In this inner circle are going to go people you are so close to, you feel that you cannot live without them. In the next circle are people who are still very important to you, but they didn't belong in your inner circle. And finally, we'd like you to just, list people who are important, but who haven't already been listed. Please list people that are close and important to you, not just people you happen to know or happen to be related to. And so people do this. It's been used in all over, in China, in Korea, in Germany. It's very easy to translate. To put it in German, you say du. Put it in French, vous. It's pretty easy. We did it again, and we did it a little differently. And we said, okay, now we're going to talk about people who bother you. People who bother you a lot and much of the time, people who bother you only some of the time, and people who only occasionally, bother, upset you. Your circles can be empty, full, or anywhere in between. That's instructions given on both of those. Now, this was a new technique, and what we did is we went through and classified the ties as solely positive. They only showed up in the first circles. Solely negative or mixed. And the literature calls this ambivalent. it may or may not match your sense of what ambivalent means, but in this talk and in the family literature, it will mean negative and positive feelings. And so we were able to do this by asking a variety of questions about the people. What is their name? What is their age? What is their gender? What is their relationship to use? Because, you know, there may be 4 Marys, and that way we can see that that was Mary, your daughter, who showed up in both, but Mary, your friend, was only positive, and Mary, your coworker's just a pain. So again, ambivalent is going to mean having opposing attitudes or feelings in this talk. When we looked at parents classifying children of different ages as ambivalent, ambivalence peaks in the teens when the kids are in the teens. And for those of you who have kids in the teens, that probably won't surprise you. It's still there with little teeny kids. You adore them, but they drive you nuts a little bit. When we interviewed the children, these are not dyads, by the way, I should say, just a sample of children. Teenagers were less ambivalent about their parents than those in their 20s. So this is kind of an interesting developmental progression. It suggests that it's not that dyadic, that kids have a feeling as they're trying to figure out the world. And one of the things they talk about is what you believe you should be doing. So that interdependency may create ambivalence. But what it really tells you is that at midlife, the ambivalence at midlife for young adults in both directions is going to be higher for both the parents and the grandchildren. We did a replication of this. This is from the Family Exchanges study. We took the middle-aged adult, they rated their parents, they rated their grandchildren, and the ambivalence for the grandchild was greater than for the parents. And that mimics what you just saw. So in other words, I told you about that generational stake, but that generational stake also comes with some feelings of tension. I love my children. They're the best thing in the entire world. And occasionally they drive me nuts. Young adults and midlife parents in both sets of emotion have a stronger set of emotion than midlife adults do to their older parents. And you'll see this again, I think, in a little bit as I give my talk. Okay, let's talk a little bit about support, because that midlife adult also has to balance help with generations above and below. Okay, so as Dr. Jorgensen mentioned, or Dr. Jensen mentioned, we have the Family Exchanges study, and we call the midlife adult the target because they were where we started. We targeted them. We got adults ages 40 to 60 in 2008. We got their spouses. We got up to 3 or 4 grown children. And then we got their mother and father if they were living. So we do have quite a constellation. I'm going to talk primarily today just about this target's responses on all these people, because I think it's a little easier to follow that. So I will be primarily talking about this person's perceptions. We did phone interviews in 2008, and then in 2013, we did phone or web-based surveys. People had come farther, they could choose. We had something called a daily diary for 7 days, which again, that's where they answer a survey every day for 7 days. We actually did that by phone at that time because it was easier and more accessible. And then we obtained some salivary samples so we could analyze those for various stress hormones. Okay, so how do parents and grown children help? We looked at several types of support: emotional support, practical support, which is also sometimes called instrumental support in the research literature. We looked at talking about daily events, and this is not a widely researched type of support, but if you have a new child, for example, a baby, you want to talk about it all the time. And there are very few people who want to hear about every little thing. The baby spit up, the baby rolled over, the baby rolled the other way, and your parents do. And so that's an important form of support: advice, money, and companionship, just being with each other. Well, what we found is that I'm so sorry, I've got to pause because Zoom life, I've got a cat that needs to be let out. Go, buddy, there you go. Sorry, if I had left it out during the talk, it would have been begging to get in. So anyways, the frequency of the midlife adult providing support to parents and offspring, what you see here is that they do provide especially more money to the grandchild. Let me show you this. Just to tell you, overall, they give more support to grandchildren. They give more advice. They give more emotional support. They give more companionship, which is clearly mutual. They spend more time together in a way that's enjoyable. and they give more money to their grown children. So the offspring is, yes, receiving more on the whole. Why do they help their grown children more? We looked at some of the factors that might explain that. This is a way of doing the statistical model. We looked at their sense of obligation. Is it just that you should help your grown children and people like to do what they feel they should? Is it because they love them more? Or is it because they're more important in their life? This is the most important person. This person is more important to me. And the answer is that it was the importance. It's not a huge difference, but it's a difference that matters when you're giving support. So it's really, again, that generational stake. This is the person who's going to be my legacy. I love both of them. I actually feel more obligated to help my parent. Do they ever vary in these patterns? Well, the answer is yes. So it's not that all families always give more to grown children. It's that statistically, on average, they do. But if you look at the distribution of families, yes, the child gets more in over half. So that's going to show up. But the parent gets more at about 21%, and they share a similar amount in this group, about a quarter of them. This group we're going to look at, but that mimics when you look at midlife adults, about 20% of them are defined as caregivers at any point in the US. If you look at patterns over age, keep in mind that these these children go from age 18 into their mid-30s. And there's also a pattern where with age, we have a paper that shows that with age, that help drops off. So in some of our older groups, they're going to be a little older, but the parent doesn't need help yet. Okay, so when we look at those patterns, why do some families give more to grown children? Well, again, it's the investment and the importance. It's the student status and the not being married. So that is partly associated with being younger. It's also what I said before. It's those needs. These represent needs. I need my parent to be invested in me. I don't have other people. I don't have a spouse where I'm the primary person in their life. And I need this, and my parent's responding to it. They give more to their parents when the parent is disabled or has life crises such as widowhood. And what that means is that they're really responding to needs here. It's not a role reversal because they're not more invested or finding them more important. It's a difference. It's that pendulum swinging that when the parent has needs, that grown child is their background resource. So grown children typically get more because of the investment, because of what we call the life course statuses. Parents getting more is the exception, and it's associated with needs. And when you think about it, you might be willing to help a stranger or an acquaintance under those conditions. So of course you're going to help a parent. You've got that attachment to them. There is no role reversal. And I just want to say that again, because when you look at those factors, the parent doesn't become the most important person in your life. They don't become the person that you are invested in. That's just not there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about conflict and how do they regulate conflict, because that's a dance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a model that I have that is broader on relationships in late life. We call it the social input model. And the idea there is that the two people are giving each other input that regulates their negative emotion or their ambivalence. I'm going to give you some data from a very old study of mine, but it really speaks to this issue. So what happens here is we interviewed mothers and daughters, and we interviewed them alone and we interviewed them together. When we interviewed the daughters alone and we said, tell us about a time when you were irritated, hurt, or annoyed, even a little, with your mother. And every single daughter gave us a response of, oh, my mother, she's constantly telling me how to raise my children. And there are just times where it drives me nuts and I try to be polite and whatever. The disclaiming group, we don't use pause for response because some people like to think more, and older adults are always slower than younger adults in response, not always, but it's typical. And so we used a verbal disclaimer. So some daughters would say, oh my gosh, my mother, she's so easy to get along with, but I can't think of anything, but oh, she won't get a flu shot. Medicare would pay for it, and why won't she do it? It drives me nuts, or whatever. When we interviewed them with their mothers, a third of them turned to their mothers and said, I can't think of anything. Can you, Mom? And none of these daughters had dementia. We had interviewed them a week ago. So this was interesting. When we interviewed the mothers alone, a third of them gave disclaimers. Oh, no. And then 20% of them refused to respond. And we were good at getting responses. We say things like, oh, everyone has problems with their daughter. And we pause for a very long time. Silence gets uncomfortable in an interview. People fill it in. These women, no, Joni's never given me an ounce of trouble. She's always been a perfect daughter. Couldn't get them to answer. A week later, every single mother participated. And this group that responded directly is not the same people. Some people who said absolutely not jumped right in and said, honey, you do let the kids drive into the city, on their own, and that's just too dangerous and it upsets me. They were as likely to bring up the topic. They were as likely to participate. The differences in the joint interview were very minimal, whereas they were notable in the individual interview. So what's happening in this relationship? Well, the daughters do see problems, but in the best relationships, they tone down their responses with their mothers. And they also, I should have added here, they think about it differently. So one daughter, her mother was widowed maybe a couple of years ago. It's not the crisis, but the mother is a widow. And the daughter says, she gets lonely and she calls me all day long at work. And so I just leave my phone on speakerphone. And every now and then I say, oh, mom, as though I'm listening, but I'm really getting my work done. A daughter could have said, my mom has no respect for my job. She interrupts me all day long. You can see the difference there. But the fact that she's able to just say, it makes her mother feel really good. The mothers are acting motherly. They're bragging to the interviewer. And then when they're with their daughters, they're trying to still socialize them. Oh, honey, be sure you send a thank you note. Oh, mind your manners. All of that has become a pattern of response, even into midlife. Okay, do they behave the same way when they're upset with each generation? Because all I showed you there was that midlife daughter, not the midlife mother aspect to it. There are two ways that social scientists conceptualize conflict, and this is particularly in the marital literature. One is this active idea, and you can discuss things, which is very positive, or you can argue, sort of confront them. You could also take a more passive approach, and that is not always bad. You can accept the problem. Maybe you think about it, maybe you pray about it, maybe you, find a way to accept that this is here. That daughter who said, my mother calls me and she's just lonely, and I figure out a way to deal with it, but she's not discussing or arguing, she's just accepting. Or you can avoid, and I didn't quite know how to put this, but it's like sulking and being annoyed with them, but going off on your own, and it doesn't help anybody there. Okay, so we looked at those. How do they handle annoyances with each child and with each parent? And what we found is that with their grown children, they do discuss and argue. They confront that problem, whether it's in a positive or negative way. It's very open. With the parents, they accept and avoid. They just say, I just can't talk to my mother. She is driving me nuts. Or, oh, my dad is just a good guy and I just don't want to, deal with anything that's bothering me about him, but in a good way. Why? Why is that occurring? Parents, they give that advice. They still see, even in midlife, that grown child is malleable. I can guide them. With the parent, there's a feeling that time is running out. So what's happening there is that some of the daughters, so I called them back and said, hey, I noticed that you were really upset about your mom. You talked for a half hour when I talked to you last week, but this week you said you couldn't think of anything. What's going on here? And sometimes they'd say, my mother's 85. And how many times am I going to get to spend time with her? I don't want to spend it arguing about a flu shot or whatever. So the sense that time is running out with her. The other thing was the beliefs that the parent cannot be changed. So some of the daughters said, I'm 37 years old. I've, been upset about that since I was 15. And after 22 years, I'm not going to bang my head against the wall anymore. So there's two set of beliefs. And one is sort of a positive sense that time is running out. And the other might be sort of related to our stereotypes about aging. And it's sort of a sense that you just can't do anything about this. Okay, now is a question about daily life. So does this play out in daily life, or is it just something you're thinking about, in the big picture? We all know this. You have these things where you're driving to work and you're thinking about something and it might not have happened right in that moment. Well, when we looked at the daily, we looked at them every day and we asked them, hey, did you have contact with each of your parents or grown children? Did you have a positive experience, negative experience? Did you provide them with emotional support, advice, or practical support? And what we found is that they had contact a lot with their children on almost every day on average. Not quite as much, but almost half the days they had contact with a parent. They were more likely, they rarely had stressful interactions, but it was more likely to happen with a parent. They had more negative thoughts. So that thing where you're driving to work, but they could remember it at the end of the day. They do have that more enjoyable feeling about being with their kid, and they're with their kids more. Okay, how about once I'm just going to show you sort of a big picture here. Did you help them at least once? Those grown children are getting more emotional, more advice, and even more practical. So yeah, I helped my kid with their health insurance. They didn't know how to do this. So I just did it. I went over to help them paint the porch or whatever, which is interesting. Now they are helping parents, but again, remember that that could be a different group. So most of them are helping grown children, even throughout the week when we ask them, yes, today I helped. It's not just the big help, it's everyday help. We looked at why, and I say it's the usual suspect. The needs. Did you have problems? Is the parent disabled? The affection, we don't have the importance. So really here we have the relationship quality when you love them, but really it's what we'd call a proxy. It's the equivalent of that importance. So it's playing out in daily life the way it does on those big picture views of the relationship. The summary of the daily experience is also the generational stake and the needs. These are two sets of things that come into play. We have those generational differences then in relationship qualities, in support, in conflicts, in the way that they get handled. Now, interestingly, again, I'm just going to give you that reminder, there was more ambivalence towards the grown kid, but the conflicts also get handled in different ways. And the daily experience is consistent with that, except that they're not having the negative thoughts and the stress that they had in the bigger picture. You know, map out who you feel you love and map out who's bothering you here. But on a day-to-day basis, more likely to be having those negative thoughts about your parents, even though they're very well loved, both of them. So what about the future? Well, the forms of contact, we've got this past, but the forms of contact are changing. And again, you have some really great expertise in your department about technology and how it plays out amongst young adults today. Certainly, I hope that there are many people who are over the age of 65 who are able to attend today. So you're, very Zoom savvy, but on the other hand, there are a lot of older adults who are not and not as comfortable. That won't be the case in the future. So we're going to see differences in the contact, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Does it create ambivalence? Does it create stress? We have seen a huge increase in co-residence, and that occurred prior to the pandemic. Now, the pandemic has accelerated that. But in 2018, the modal form of living arrangements for young adults was with their parents. What that means is more young adults lived with their parents than in any other arrangement. So than in married relationships, than in cohabitation, than with a roommate. And that has certainly increased during the pandemic. There's this delay in marriage. So where marriage used to be very much caught up in the ties to the parents, there's a lot longer period of life where the two parties are relating as individuals. And that's going to change things as it progresses because they have a longer period of time in which they've established a strong bond as adults. People are spending more time getting education, which, as we saw, was a factor in that involvement with parents. Childbearing is delayed. And there's just increased connections across generations, which on the whole, I didn't have a chance to lecture on that today, but it's very beneficial to both parties. Grown children are thriving because their parents are involved and helping them and giving them advice and filling in ways that are really vital until you are well established in your 30s or 40s. And even then, the closeness is highly beneficial. So from adolescence to old age, I have one closing thought. So really from the time you're in your teens to the time you're in your 80s, 90s, 100, like Dr. Clark, you want to find a heart that will love you at your worst and arms that will hold you at your weakest. And that's really the parent-child tie. Even when there's ambivalence, even when there's need, that heart, that love is really enduring in this tie. I want to thank and acknowledge my funding sources that supported this. I want to let you know that if you'd like to access these data, they're public access at University of Michigan. So that means you can write a paper from it. But please keep me posted because I'd love to know what you learn. I'm extremely grateful to the Clark family for giving me also the opportunity to be here and to share with you. It's been a really terrific experience. I'm very grateful to the people who have worked with me on this project. It involved a lot of people who were grad students and collaborators. And I'd like to turn it over to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'll clap while everybody else claps on their own. Appreciate you sharing this wonderful research and really opening our eyes to patterns in intergenerational connections. Thank you. Thank you so much again, Karen. We appreciate your time, your expertise, your generous sharing with us today, and even a little extra time here to answer some questions. So thank you again on behalf of our program for being with us, and really appreciate it.